All right, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. To everybody, welcome to day 3 of AABC's virtual annual meeting webinar series. I'm Ray Burt, Executive Director of AABC. Very pleased to welcome you all again here today, either for the first time or back. We are once again going to take a brief moment for a message from AABC industry partner and sponsor of today's session, Ameritech Data Solutions, and then we'll be right back to kick off our technical session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Are you looking for the ultimate in tab reporting software? If so, then our new TabOps Reporting 2020 is the software for you. With features like use your own tab forms, auto cloud synchronization, auto table of contents generation, PDF, Word, and Excel importers, photo capture and photo galleries, and our new static pressure profile builder. You'll be amazed at how easy our TabOps reporting software is to use and how quickly you can generate a complete tab report. Ask for a demo today. Don't forget to ask about some of our other softwares that are new for 2020, TabOps Markup and TabOps Takeoff, our latest additions to our TabOps suite of software for your tab business.
All right, great. And thank you very much to Ameritech for their support of AABC and of today's webinar. Once again, a few Zoom notes before we start today's session. If you do have a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A button specifically, not the chat button, in your Zoom window toward the bottom. We'll feed those questions to Todd Yates at the end of his session. And again, I do want to note that you do not need to wait until the very end of the session. You can go ahead and enter those, put them in queue as questions occur to you during his presentation. And then if you have technical issues, do use the chat for that, and our technical specialists will assist you in getting those resolved. So again, today's presentation, case studies in commissioning and test and balance collaboration, specifically an Army Reserve Center and a medical office building. Our presenter is Todd Yates with Synergy Test and Balance in Indianapolis. Todd is, in addition to being a PE, Todd is a certified test and balance engineer through AABC, and he's also a certified commissioning authority through ACG. So he knows both sides of this equation very well, and he'll take you through topics like coordination of system design and installation review, scheduling related activities, and delivery of final reports. So with that, I will hand it over to Todd, and Todd, take it away.
Thank you, Ray. So there's a little bit about me and where I come from, where my career you can see there. We want to talk today about these two projects, an Army Reserve Center, medical office building and clinic, and examine those things that Ray discussed. Our learning objectives for today is to talk about how early collaboration and setting the stage for success is really the key to getting there. The difference between scheduling and sequencing. We don't often think about how those things are different or even use the term sequencing, but it's important as we do this, and this process can help leverage that. The importance of coordinated site activity and consistency in documenting and delivering the final report. So these two projects tell you a little bit about them so you get some context there. It's an Army Reserve Center, 50,000 square feet. One air handler that served part of the area, exhaust fans that served multiple areas in the building, 75 grills, 2 kitchen EFs and 2 kitchen hoods. That was a renovation project. The medical office building and clinic was a new facility, 20,000 square feet, 4 air handlers, 11 zone control dampers, 175 grills total, and 14 exhaust fans. So early collaboration, setting the stage for success. We have to start strong in our planning and in coordination if we want this to pay off. As a test and balance contractor, I know you all watching, if that is your background, you have experienced getting the phone call that says, hey, you bid this project 9 months ago. We forgot to inform you that it's your contract. Can you be here Tuesday? if that happens, it's too late. So commissioning it will actually many times prevent that. So we have to start early. And one of the things that we want to do is participate in the commissioning kickoff meeting to leverage that for a few specific things. We'll go through and after we go through the ideology of it, we'll talk about some specific things on these projects. So we want to integrate the test and balance personnel into the kickoff meeting. We want people to know who the names are of the project manager, the technicians. We want them to be familiar with that and have the idea in their mind that these people are involved in the project now, not just at the end, not just when we have to have them. And we want to integrate scheduling at that time. Many times we see test and balance as a placeholder on a schedule, or even when they want it complete. They have the date, test and balance. It's a large project. They have 1 day for test and balance. That's when it starts and ends. And a lot of times you ask the question and you get, well, we don't really know how long it's going to take, but that's just there. So we keep track of it. Well, when you're in it, when you're collaborating with a commissioning provider, you can get that integrated into the schedule up front and have that people thinking about they're going to need to be in here. How are we going to do that? And we have this establishes open lines of communication to the project team, which is different than the normal process of just having us communicate with our client, which is many times a mechanical contractor. We want to use the commissioning provider's site observation report to sequence our test and balance work. We can use that to do things like confirm the completion of installation, of site readiness, and confirm the startup of controls. Integrate the commissioning and tab verification with the other tab site work. If we can avoid coming back to the project for return trips that are unnecessary, that's beneficial to the test and balance contractor. If we can integrate this with the functional performance test, it's helpful to the commissioning provider as well. And the ideal outcome is that everybody has a better project when we're working together than if we were just doing these things on our own. We can also use this planning and coordination to establish the fact that we're going to send our test and balance field reports to the entire construction team, not just the contractor that we're working for, assuming it's the mechanical. That's a structure we see. It may be different in your area, but I'm talking from from what we see here regionally. But if one of the things that happens to us is this field report gets there, but not necessarily to the people that need to act on it and do the things. And when we can establish up front that this is the way things are, this is the way information is disseminated, it's a great help later on. So number 2, the difference between scheduling and sequencing. Not something we often hear about, but scheduling is the line items that you see on the Gantt charts and when they want things started and completed. But many times these things, it looks good on paper, but they don't take into account that some things are prerequisites for other things. So the startup of the subsystems is a piece of that we see. And people will say, well, the air handler started. Can't we get test and balance here? Well, the air handler's been bumped. It can run in hand, but none of the VAVs are programmed. Things of that nature. We've done a piece of the startup, so start test and balance. Well, by integrating early and with the commissioning process, we can get these ideas out there on the floor so that people understand what the needs really are and how we go about doing that. What about the controls? Again, as I said earlier, they may have started the air handler, they may have started the pumps, but are the controls complete? And as a test and balance contractor, if we're not getting the call till the end of the project, we don't get a chance to talk about those things. When is the test and balance integrated? We're going to bring test and balance in after the subsystems and main systems have been started, after the controls are complete. That test and balance in itself is a prerequisite for the functional performance test that the commissioning provider is going to implement for the HVAC system. And we know that commissioning providers are often frustrated by that because they don't have good communication with the test and balance contractor. They're trying to implement functional performance tests. They have, multiple system failures. Why doesn't this work? Why am I seeing this odd functional issue? Well, we haven't had the test and balance contractor here. They haven't calibrated that. I'm sure it'll work fine when they do that. So our work is actually a prerequisite for some of the commissioning work, and you can see how these things are, stair-stepped on one another. So by being involved early, by being part of the construction team, rather than just somebody that has to come at the end and do some things and create a report for us, we get to talk about these issues and actually, get them in the schedule. So now we've done the test and balance. The commissioning provider is working on their functional performance test. How do we integrate tab verification? Sometimes it's easy for that to sneak up on us or for us to forget that we have to do it. We're done. We've submitted a report. We're away from the project. Then we get a call back to come and do the tab verification. Part of our contract, part of our scope of work. We have to do it, but because we didn't plan it working with a whole team, it's inefficient in the way that we're delivering that part of our service. So again, by scheduling and sequencing, we see how these things lay out, and we get to plan them more methodically than we would under normal circumstances, maybe. The importance of coordinated site activity. How things get done on a project construction managers, general contractors don't often see how these things go together. And each team is each subset of the team is so specialized that we often don't know what the other's doing. Now, one of the things that we're seeing now is the acceptance of remote meetings and how we can use those. We may not be able to, especially if a project is far away, it may be impractical to attend the meetings, but without being involved, we don't know what's going on. We don't know where the project stands in terms of progress that relates to us directly, or indirectly. So by being able to be engaged in the remote meetings, we have a better understanding of the progress and the work path of the project. And again, to work as part of the commissioning team, it gives us a leg up here because people are not usually that, if they're just thinking about test and balance, they're not thinking about test and balance till much later in the project. By being part of the commissioning team, we get integrated into this process where we can participate in these remote meetings and gain a good deal of understanding of where the building is at that point. And floor installation is one common thing that we see that's overlooked, and this goes back to sequencing and scheduling somewhat, but it has to be coordinated. We had, it's not uncommon to have a project where they call us to do the test and balance, and they're putting in a terrazzo floor or they're putting down an epoxy floor. It's right in the area where we have to be. There's no way to work around it. We have to have access, but we can't get access. So this is another question that we can ask early. It's information that we can gather as being part of the commissioning team, information that's unavailable to us in other formats, or if we're working as an island unto ourselves. Drywall finishes is another common issue. If you have a building where they are spraying paint, working on drywall, these things create a lot of dust. They prevent function of the equipment. Now, sometimes we do see them run the equipment. What happens there? We have the same issues as before, where we're not sequencing. This work can't be going on, on a calendar timeline. It may look fine. It may look like it doesn't overlap, but working with drywalls and finishes prevents operation of the HVAC equipment, or it potentially damages the HVAC equipment by running it in an environment that's unhealthy for it. So by coordinating the site activities, by participating in the remote meetings, being part of this commissioning team, we can make the most of that new process, new relationship there. Startup and controls. These are the systems have to be functional. If we don't have functional systems, we cannot do the test and balance. So again, we're leveraging this relationship with the commissioning provider to determine that the systems are functional, and to have someone on our side who's helping to implement that. And if not get it done on time, at least we know when it is, and we know that, okay, now is not the time for us to be on site. We want to integrate our tab verification with the commissioning provider's FPTs. Sometimes this may require real-time reporting, or at the very least, it may be helpful to do real-time tab reporting, and with the ability to do tab reports, online data storage, to be working from iPads or computers in the field, gives us the ability to share access to the reports in real time. Consistency in documenting the final reports is something that's often overlooked, but we see it creating a lot of kickbacks on reports, unintentionally, of course. We need to use consistent nomenclature to cross-reference the tab and the CX. I see many times where we may be using different names for the equipment. AH instead of AHU is a simple example, but we can coordinate up front to use the same nomenclature for the same systems, the same types of issues, and sometimes we have to adapt to that. So we may have to adapt from the process we normally use, so that our report can be consistent with the commissioning report. The commissioning provider may very well adapt and adopt some of the nomenclature that we use. But if these documents, the test and balance report and the commissioning report, are consistent, that goes a long way to getting approval by the engineer of record when they review that report. We want to make sure that the tab verification is complete and documented. One of the things often missed in test and balance reports is final settings, static pressure, differential pressure settings, outside air control settings, calibration of airflow devices. Sometimes these things are inadvertently left out. By working through the test and balance verification process with the commissioning provider, we have a much better chance of getting those in the report. And again, the more complete that report is, the more likely the engineer is to accept it. And if things aren't complete and they start seeing things, then that triggers, this is how I review things, and I know it works for them. They see things and they think, well, if they missed that, what else did they miss? So then, then we're looking for, they start looking for other things. And so by coordinating this with the commissioning provider, by having them, the commissioning provider is essentially taking a first look at our tab report and helping us find those things. that are gonna create potential problems with the designer of record, even though the work itself may be fine. And this gives us a chance to show the causes for out of tolerance readings. This is another thing that leads to rejection of reports. And it may be the case by working through working with the commissioning provider during their process that some of these things get resolved. At the very least, they get documented well. And so there's some support for why this came out the way it did. I think some designers see it and they think, well, it's out of tolerance. Clearly they didn't work hard enough to get it in tolerance. Yet the reality is it may be entirely impossible to get it within tolerance. And the commissioning provider gives us as a tab contractor a backup to that, to another explanation, another set of eyes looking at it to explain better why it is the way it is, if it can't be corrected. And this is essentially the pre-review of the tab report. And we have found that engineers are much more likely to accept a tab report when they know that commissioning has been involved as well, and that there's two sets of eyes looking at it. Number one, it creates a better report, and two, it creates a sense of security for the designer, knowing that, well, the commissioning providers looked at it, they've done tab verification. I feel good about it going into it. So as they review it, they have a different mindset. So let's look at some specific project examples from these two projects, and talk about how we applied some of these concepts that I've gone over here. We started early in both of these projects and established inclusive and transparent communication protocols early. We attended the commissioning kickoff meeting. And you can see a shot of that here on the side. Here was the commissioning team, and I've blanked out the names of the other parties for their privacy. But you could see that. Look how many people were on there: the owner's user, the owner's representative, the owner's commissioning agent, who was really just a person who was giving oversight to the commissioning process, the architect, the mechanical and plumbing engineer, the electrical engineer, the construction managers, mechanical contractors, the control. We had these are all the people that we need to have a successful test and balance project. And now we're connected with these people, because too often test and balance is isolated. Again, they don't really think about it till the end of the project. They don't really call us. Often we're not even involved when some of these people are on site. These people have practically wrapped up their project and moved on to something else before we're ever on site. Not so with either of these projects. We were established early that we were there, who are our names, how do we contact people, and we were part of the team. We did this, again, as I said, by participating in the commissioning kickoff meeting. We integrated the test and balance personnel. At this point, we integrated the test and balance scheduling. We told them how many site days we needed. And if it's, if it's 3 weeks on site, you can't just assume it's all going to get done in 3 weeks. We were able to explain to them why we need to back up, give some extra time for that. There's bound to be things that we find that need to be corrected. There's got to be some time to come back and take care, rebalance those things or balance the things that weren't ready where we found issues. We were able to work that into the project schedule so that they understood when we needed to be on site, what needed to be done. And we had an open line of communication on these projects that's not always there. In fact, it's more often than not, this is missing when we work on projects where commissioning is not involved. We were able to use by maintaining a close contact with the commissioning provider, we were able to see what the sequence of the project. We were able to sequence our work, not just schedule it. So we got good feedback from them on when the installation was complete. And you can see a shot, what's the site readiness? You can see a shot looking down the hallway there. We weren't on site when things weren't installed. The building was complete. It was clean. They weren't running finishes. We didn't make, multiple trips to the site to try to get things done. Now, no project is perfect. So, and we don't expect that, but by working early with the commissioning provider, we were able to avoid a lot of these pitfalls. And even sometimes we're not depending on the commissioning provider to tell us everything about the project. We're looking at their reports. And you can see on the in the second photo there that just by looking at their site observation photos, we were able to find things that weren't connected. So then we get to ask the question, over the phone or in a web meeting, what about this area? When's that going to be installed? That brings things to people's minds that they weren't even considering before. We were able to confirm completion of startup and controls. That's a big thing. And again, no project is perfect. But if we can eliminate even 50% of the issues that we normally have to go to a project and find, we're well ahead of the game. And if you're working with a good commissioning provider, you're going to do much better than that. And you're not going to be, on the project when things aren't ready to run. We were on this particular project. This is one of the things I mentioned earlier. This was the outside air unit. It was DOAS 4. But that's just an example. But we were careful to use the same nomenclature on our reports that the designer used and that the commissioning provider used. So when someone's looking at both reports, it's much easier for them to cross-reference. It's much easier to understand what's going on. The designer's not looking at it and saying, well, why does the test and balance report say this? Why does the commissioning report say that? In both of these cases, the test and balance verification was completed and documented while we were on site. We did not have to make additional trips to the site to work with the contractors to do this verification work. We were able to complete it all then. In some cases, they actually watched us do it the first time. They made note of what we were doing. They made note of the readings we were taking. In other cases, again, we were able to do it while we were there with them. We had essentially had a preliminary review of our test and balance report, and that resulted in a faster approval of the final report once it was submitted. And we were able to share the TAB field reports with the construction team. This was a great benefit to the commissioning provider as well. You can see on the right one of the zone damper controls, and this was part of a unitary system. Not my favorite type of system, but we don't get to choose the system. Someone else is doing that. We had this zone control was problematic, both from a systems installation issue and system installation perspective and a controls perspective. They weren't working well. They didn't know why. We were there on site to look at one of those. We were there with them when they took it apart. They found some installation issues, some screws keeping the damper from doing what it was supposed to do. That's a very simple problem. It's a very simple, mechanical obstruction that's causing this issue. but without someone who knew what it was supposed to do, it was impossible for them to figure out. I don't know that they would have still figured it out. So then we were able to give that information to the commissioning provider so that when they were doing their functional performance test, they could put a little extra emphasis on those and make sure they work. So that's another one of the things that, I want us to get out of this, that this is not a one-way street. It's not just about what makes test and balance easier and better. It's about what makes the project better, and better for everyone, better for the owner. Ultimately, we're all serving the owner. We became AABC firms because we wanted to do the very best for the owner, and and be independent. And this is another way to do that. It really helps us accomplish the basic mission. We and the speed controller shown on this fan, it was hard to document what the speed is on that. It gives you some information on the readout, but it's difficult to document precisely where it's setting. So we were able to review that with the commissioning provider on the project. They gave us some tips on how they would like to see it reported and what would be more likely to be acceptable by the engineer. So we changed some of our notes in the way we were denoting that. And it didn't change the way we balanced it. It didn't change our airflow readings. It didn't change, any of those things, but simply by having the discussion, changing the way we documented it, that helped the report on that project, be accepted without questions about, well, what do you mean here? Why is this speed not noted? What about this? And as I said, so we completed with our return trips. We helped the commissioning provider avoid failures in their FPT, and that's unnecessary testing for everyone. So we were able to work with that. So but we also want, we do want to do better for the owner, but we also, we're all in business. We have to be productive. And, one of the ways we do that is by not having, our overages on projects. And being in test and balance, it is depending on your location, it may be considered a professional service. It's at the very least a testing service. And what we're selling is our time and our expertise and our ability to measure and do these things. So time is what matters to us. We're not going to have cost overruns, because we didn't, guess at the right price for copper pipe or some other component. If we have overruns, it's going to be in time that we're, whether it's our fault in planning or other people not planning for us, we're going to lose because we've made mistakes there. So the Army Reserve Center was completed within 7% of our estimated hours, and we had no return trips after the test and balance report was submitted. The medical office building was completed within 2% of our estimated hours. The mechanical team, even with our effort, the mechanical team, struggled with the control of those bypass dampers. But eventually they got it worked out. It would have been much more difficult had we not had a commissioning provider there coordinating with us, integrating those damper failures that we noted in their FPTs. It's very easy for someone to, push that problem off on test and balance and say it's a test and balance issue, bring them back again. That didn't happen. That got worked out through the commissioning process. And by being part of that team, we were able to accomplish that. Without them, very likely the kind of thing that could have become our problem. But again, with this project, we had no return trips after the TAB report was submitted. And so what are my final thoughts on this? Well, you can't start communicating too early. It is absolutely impossible. Once you're under contract, and you know that, reach out. Make sure that you get invited to the commissioning kickoff meeting. If the commissioning provider is doing, what I think they should be doing, you will be invited. But it does not hurt to reach out and make sure that that you're involved in that. Leverage the new acceptance of remote meeting attendance. It's difficult to be competitive and schedule all the meetings that you might want to attend. It's difficult to schedule the meetings just because the deficit that person's being taken away from some other task to go to a meeting. With the new acceptance of remote meetings, just like this Zoom meeting we're doing today, for example, you can attend meetings, you can be involved, and maybe, especially with test and balance, it's just such a narrow focus of what's going on the project in its entirety. You can even be at your desk doing other things, reviewing other reports, just listening in the background, waiting for the test and balance portion to come around. Then you can talk to them about that. You get a feel for where the project is in terms of these other things, like we said, flooring, permanent power, things like that you would not get otherwise. So, be eager to embrace that acceptance of remote meetings. It's been a strange year for everyone. But if anything, you look for the bright spots, and one of those is the ability to do things remotely and cut down on travel time and actually be more efficient with these things. And we see great ability as long as we're willing to embrace it, leverage it, and get involved. Rely heavily on your CX provider support and offer the same in return. As I said, it's a two-way street. This is not just about how we get more in, for ourselves as a test and balance contractor, but how can we give back? How can what we're doing benefit the construction team, benefit the project, ultimately benefit the owner? We can get so much by working with the commissioning provider on a project, to schedule and sequence, to ask them, okay, when you're doing your site observations with this type of system, I often see this mistake. And can you keep an eye out for that? They will happily do it. If you are pointing out something that they can catch early, that's a benefit to them, a benefit to the project, it's in their best interest. That's what they're for. They're there as the owner's advocate, and they want to make those things happen. But some of them, not all commissioning providers, come from a test and balance background. As Ray said, I've done a fair bit of commissioning as well, but that's not true for all commissioning providers. Many of them have different backgrounds. They may have come from, manufacturer's rep. They may come from design, but they will, in most cases, it's been our experience that they are happy to rely on what we can tell them, to help them do their job better. So get involved with them, rely on their support, and do what you can do to help them. Document consistently for a better, smoother report submission. If you have multiple technicians on the project, make sure that they're documenting the same things with the same terminology. Make sure that you're using terminology that's understandable to the commissioning provider. Let them have a first pass at the report. Let them point out anomalies that you can correct before it's submitted to the engineer. And just make sure those things are consistent. As I said, if you have different technicians and you're reporting the same issue or making a note of the same final settings, use the same verbiage and same terminology to do it. If you use one phrase for the first 3 air handlers and a different phrase on the next 2 air handlers, a designer is going to pick up on that inconsistency. If you're looking at them individually, it looks fine, but when you put it together in a report, that inconsistency, raises questions. If you label equipment the way you normally label that type of equipment and it's different than what's on the drawings, that again, it's another stumbling block. So make sure that you document consistently for a smoother turnover of the report and a higher likelihood that it's going to get approval the first time. So that that concludes my presentation for today. And I see Ray.
Thanks very much, Todd. So just want to let everybody know we've got about looks like five, maybe 6 questions in queue. Todd, looks like you will probably have time to answer at least a few more than that. So if you've been holding anything back, go ahead and put that in to the Q&A section of the Zoom. But Todd, if you're ready, I'll just start firing these at you. One person asked, I believe this is probably in reference to the specific projects that you highlighted, just as a overall stage setting question. Were you responsible for the PFTs, the pre-functional tests for those projects?
No, we were not. We saw that documentation because we were involved in the commissioning meetings. Not all of the commissioning meetings. I don't recall if we made any comments about them. These 2 projects were relatively simple systems, but we were not. If the question is, were we responsible for filling them out? We were not. Or we did not have to do site review to complete those. If that's the part of the question.
Okay. Next question. How would you advise a tab firm to anticipate commissioning assistance time and cost when it's not clearly defined in the specification? What is expected seems to be different on every project, which is very difficult to identify in the estimating process and has direct cost.
Yeah. Is it ever difficult? Absolutely. Well, and all I can do is tell you how we handle it is, if there are specific requirements in the specifications where it says, 8 hours of commissioning support, well, then we can certainly, schedule 8 hours. We can add that to our quote. When it's vague, it really is a guess and a gamble on our part. What we found generally, and certainly there's horror stories, we've got them. I won't go into them because this is a positive presentation today of how it should work. It can go badly, but what we have found is that there may be a little extra time required to do the commissioning support, but it pays off in the end, and it will help us complete our work more quickly. So, going through these processes, if we can help on the front end, it's going to speed up our work when we're actually doing the test and balance work. They will help us get problems corrected more quickly, because if a problem goes on my field report, and it's especially if it's a recurrent problem throughout the building, if they had an apprentice and they've missed a lot of dampers, very difficult for me to get them to go through and check all the dampers. But if the commissioning provider flags that and requires them to go through and check and make sure all the dampers are installed, that's much more likely to get done. So, it's a mix. As far as our pricing goes, if we see that commissioning is on the project and there are specific things required, we price that. And if not, then we don't, and we rely on the increased efficiency, to cover that. And, in our, we work, pretty much regionally, so we know the designers, we know the contractors, we have a pretty good feel for what's going to be required, because, we have past experience with the, with the players. And so we rely on that. You know, when it's a philosophical question, you know, I would say price the things that are concrete and plan to be a team player. If you feel like you need to put a little more time in, you know, put a little more time in, but don't go overboard, and, you know, depend on the increased efficiency to help make up for whatever additional time you do spend in the you know, with commissioning support.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Next one, attendee asks, am I correct that the presentation, your presentation, Todd, is based on the TAB team keeping the commissioning team informed of project readiness prior to the commissioning team's arrival at the project site?
Some of that, but it might actually be more the reverse, that we were utilizing the commissioning provider. Usually, or at least in our experience, I'll say, the commissioning provider has more site observation time or site review time than we would as test and balance contractor. So we're using their site observation reports, field reports, whatever they call them, you know, to determine, you know, when the systems are ready to balance, to avoid, you know, unnecessary trips. It's kind of the reverse of that. We're informing them of issues that we find that helps them with their functional performance test, but they also help us get those issues corrected. But I would say that, you know, as I see it working, you know, we're relying on their site observation as far as initial system readiness, then they are relying on ours. But the reverse is we're giving them heads up to help them with their functional performance test based on issues that we find during the test and balance process. Because they're gonna have more site observation before we get started, but we're gonna be deeper in the nuts and bolts of the system before they start their functional performance test.
Great. Thank you again. Here's another one I want to make sure I get to, because I like the way it's phrased. Do you, as a TAB provider, have any questions that you would like to ask me as a CXA? How can a commissioning authority make your job easier?
Yeah, well, I like anybody making my job easier. So read that one more time. Just make sure I get the.
I think what he's asking, I think this is a commissioning provider, and what he's saying is maybe weigh in on what can the commissioning provider do to make the TAB agency's job easier.
Yeah, so one key thing is to facilitate me getting my information to the team, because one of the things that is frustrating to, you know, all test and balance firms that I know is they find an issue, they write it up, they get it to their contractor, and because they're isolated, it doesn't go past that point. And if it's something simple that the contractor does, it's an installation issue. They missed a damper, they missed a valve, you know, that can get done. If it's a bigger issue, especially related to sequence of operation, you know, the control contractor's got it programmed such that, you know, the system isn't stable or isn't going into the right mode so that we can test it. Those kind of things, just, it's like they hit a brick wall and they stop. And sometimes we even put those on a test and balance report and submit a final report with the intent of it getting rejected by the engineer to get it working. So one of the biggest things that a commissioning provider can do is to make sure that the test and balance contractor is integrated into that process early. Don't let the contractors that are, you know, higher up say, well, they're just a TAB guy, we'll bring them in later. Make sure that they get brought in, you know, early, not to, you know, beat them up and make them attend, you know, monthly meetings or do extra work that's not in their scope, but to be part of the team and make sure that issues that that are issues for the TAB contractor get in front of everybody. Because when the issue's holding up the TAB contractor, whose report is generally required for occupancy, when that gets in front of the team is motivated to fix it. So I would say the biggest conceptual thing is make sure that the tab contractor is integrated and not isolated.
Great. So Todd, I've got basically 3 different versions of the same question that came in here. And this is probably a question you anticipate, but basically, what are the thoughts on doing both the commissioning and the test and balance on the same project? One person even asked specifically, do you do that? But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's, we don't do that in the sense that we have the same person doing it. We may be involved with both projects, but we'd have separate people. And a lot of times the commissioning scope is broader. It might include lighting controls, security, things that are, beyond the scope of a normal tab technician or even a TBE. So if, conceptually, I don't have any problem with it. If that's the way, the owner or the construction team, the designer, whoever's making the decision, if they want to do that, fine. Especially if they're hiring AABC and ACG firms, because if you trust me to do one, I would think you would trust me to do others. So philosophically, I don't have a problem with it personally, but I like to see a different team on it, a different set of eyes. So for the same reason that I'm not very good at proofreading my own letters, I'm not, if me personally, Todd, is doing both things on a project, I'm more likely to miss things because I've already got it set in my mind, not because I'm trying, there's no nefarious intent or anything. But separate sets of eyes help. So if the same company was hired to do test and balance and commissioning, and the commissioning scope is within the within their wheelhouse of what they can do, I don't see a problem with doing it, especially if we're talking about AABC and ACG independent firms who are not otherwise connected to the designer, the equipment sales, the installing contractors. When you start to cross those lines, then there's some potential conflict of interest, and things can get a little hazy. But both, as we perceive it, and I've been in AABC, associated with ABC my entire engineering career, and so that that idea of independence is ingrained in me. So as long as that can be maintained, I see no problem with doing it.
Got it. This is a different one. When you're involved early and the contractor does not address deficiencies in a timely fashion and the schedule is impacted, you have to expend non-efficient time. This gives you a leg up if you're having to request additional funds. I suppose that's more of a comment than a question, but any thoughts on that?
Well, that's exactly true. And if you're integrated into the process early, with the commissioning process, then your documentation is in front of a lot more people. So if you are claiming that you're owed additional fee for additional services, then if it's just you and the mechanical contractor, again, integration versus isolation. If you're integrated, then your information about those deficiencies has been submitted to the team. If you've got this broad communication protocol that we espoused, early in the early in the process here, then your information is out there and established. You're not just down the line, under the mechanical contractor, and it's a conversation just between you two where he can keep that isolated. When that information is out there early and more broadly, it may not guarantee you additional fee, but it certainly increases your opportunity to get it. So that's why I say make sure you're in the process early, because the later you get in, the less ability you have to change things and make them better, and you're more likely to get beat up on things that's exactly as described in that question.
Great. Next one, this is a little different. I think I recognize the name and the company as being not US based, being from international. Just asking, are test and balance engineers responsible for startup?
No, not in our region, and especially not in AABC, because we're not affiliated with the equipment providers or the installing contractors. Now, that said, I have seen a lot of times where they would like me to be involved in startup. We've seen a lot of things not wired, not started, and they say, well, all you got to do is flip the switch. Well, the classic definition of informal definition of startup is flipping a switch and hoping nothing catches fire. I don't want to be the guy to flip the switch, in that circumstance. So, but I do know from some work with international firms that, how commissioning and test and balance is handled, in areas outside the US and Canada specifically. They see it's a much different definition of what they're expecting from those providers. But here, test and balance, the last thing I'm going to do is start a piece of equipment.
Thanks, Todd. I agree. That seemed like a fairly easy question from what we're used to here, but we are seeing more interest, more questions, more participation from those that are outside of the U.S. And we do appreciate that. So, and as you said, we also see that there are very different models for the construction industry. So I wanted to get that one in there as well. Someone asks kind of a nuts and bolts question. Do you bookmark your final test and balance reports for easier navigation?
We do, especially if they are larger reports. If it's a small project and it's 24 pages, and it's all the same type of, it's 4 rooftop units, I might not do that. But for the larger reports, we absolutely bookmark those by system.
Great.
And we get a lot of positive feedback from that. It's not typically, and for as long as we've been doing electronic reports now, you would think it would be much more clear in the specifications what the designers want. But a lot of them still don't, clearly specify that. And we still see things that say, provide 7 copies of the test and balance report. And then you ask the question like, oh, no, we want a PDF of that. But that's literally all the instruction you get. But once you're used to using the, we use Adobe software to do that. It's not difficult, and the clients and engineers seem to really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Here's another specification related question. We normally see commissioning authorities indicating added cost for them to follow up on a failed test, although the actual specification does not allow or indicate this added cost. How do you handle that situation?
Well,
or do you see that, I suppose?
No, we do see it, and I see that in the specification with regard to commissioning providers. In my experience, that's there because the commissioning providers are often part of the design team, and they're able to write that into the spec, and it gives them more leverage if they do need to, invoke that. As far as test and balance, we very rarely have that opportunity, and we have to rely on just being firm about it, with certain people, our clients are largely mechanical contractors, and most of them are great contractors and great people to work with. They understand, hey, I'll help you out. I know I need, always have to go back and retest something, but I can't go back 10 times. I can't, rebalance an entire building because somebody made a mistake on this and now they want to operate it differently. So, it's case by case for us, but there's very seldom anything in the specification, or do we have the opportunity to get it in the specification to help us with that. Some of the clients who hire test and balance direct, do have that in there, and some of them even, have a contingency that, we can bill against if we have to do, excessive retests, and then they back charge the contractors for that. But that's more the exception than the rule,
Okay,
at least
great.
at least in our region where we work.
Got it. Have you had projects where you were contracted through the commissioning provider? And if so, what were the advantages or disadvantages to that arrangement?
Yes. And that is, without going way back into the history, that is actually how Synergy got started, because, a couple owners in particular wanted the commissioning provider to also provide the test and balance contractor under their contract. They weren't asking them to do the work, but they were asking the commissioning provider to hold the test and balance contract. Now, what the owner was trying to get at is they wanted test and balance direct to them, but they did not want the responsibility of managing a testing firm that was then going to be inserted into the construction process, giving the contractors the ability to say, well, we were done, but your tab guy didn't get finished, so therefore you can't hold us responsible for not meeting the project deadlines. So the advantage to having both under one, especially if both are, and make sure I got the structure right, the tab contractor is working for the commissioning provider, and if the commissioning provider is working directly for the owner, that's almost an ideal situation, and it's certainly the next best thing to working directly for the owner, because you're connected to somebody who has you can go straight to the owner if things are really bad. And if things aren't really bad, when you go to the contractors, they know that you have a direct line to the owner, so they tend to be maybe more cooperative than they might be in normal situations. We in the times that we've done that, I can't think of a downside. I can't think of a downside to that structure.
Okay, great. Do you see a benefit for the pre-functional checklists being submitted and approved prior to test and balance?
Oh, absolutely. The benefit there is, that the things that are supposed to be installed, are installed. I like to see startup reports, before I begin test and balance. I don't always get that. Sometimes working with the commissioning provider, they have access to it. They can push for that. But if the contractors haven't gone to the trouble to finish the pre-functional checks for the commissioning provider, what really is my confidence level that they have made sure that things are, installed and functional and ready for me? So, I really, want to see those completed, before I begin test and balance. And, sometimes we've even had input on, what goes on. Like I said, or, when I answered one of those earlier questions, we don't usually, ask for a lot on those, or we don't have any oversight, but sometimes we can say, with this type of system, there's this one component that's often installed incorrectly. Can we add that to the list? So definitely having the pre-functional checks completed before we step foot on site to do the test and balance. Again, there are no guarantees in life, but that it's been our experience that makes things better, because that's indicative of quality of the overall project. If people are on the ball and they're doing those things, they're mindful of installing systems, getting them done. They're mindful of quality overall. That's better for everybody.
Okay, great. I think you brushed on this question on a specific example earlier, but more broadly, do you increase your tab estimate when the project is being commissioned?
No, we do not. Other than, as I said in that specific question, other than if there are specific requirements. If it, in some projects we'll get, or some specifications will say, include, 24 hours for commissioning support. If they say something like that, I do it. If they say, attend 3 commissioning meetings, I will put that in there, especially if it's a project that's far away and involves travel. If it's close, and depending on the size of the project and who the players are, I might decide that, it's worth my time to do that. It's going to help me more in the long, the few hours I spend doing that's going to help me more in the long run. But generally speaking, I do not increase the price just because commissioning is involved, because normally commissioning, I have a better chance if I don't do, any commissioning activities per se. I have a better chance of finishing that project on budget if there's commissioning there than if there's not.
That's what we all hope, the way it's supposed to work, right?
Yeah, and there's always the outliers, but
Sure.
generally speaking, we have found that to be true.
Okay. Question, we're seeing more requests for preliminary tab reports by commissioning providers. Everyone knows that preliminary reporting is a momentum terminator. How are you handling these requests?
Well, that's a very good question. And within the last year, we have gone to online, real-time reporting. So our technicians are using iPads in the field to create the test and balance reports. When someone asks for a preliminary report, let's say it's a phased project, all we have to do is look at that document in the office, and we have access to it as long as the technician has internet access. When they type a reading in, we have access to that in the office. And that has made preliminary reports extremely simple compared to when we were doing the reports in the field on paper, because then you had to get the technician to scan the report or scan that section of the report. Then you had to, read over it, make sure that their handwriting is at least somewhat legible, make sure there weren't any bad comments about the designer or anyone else written in the margins of the report, and I'm not really kidding about that. You had to do all those things. And then you've got what looks like a messy assemblage of numbers because it's scanned, it's just not pretty. But now that we've gone to, digital real-time reporting, it's very simple. It's no cost. So, I'm not thrilled when people want too many versions of a preliminary report. It's no cost, but it's much lower cost and it's a much better product. So, and the transition to that has not been, seamless or necessarily simple, but it hasn't been extremely painful either. And, already, just a year into it, we see a great benefit to that. So we didn't do it for that reason, but that's that's a side benefit. But when you're doing it, if you're still doing reports on paper, those preliminary reports are, that's a hurdle. It really is.
Okay. Moving into our last 3 questions here. This one sounds like kind of a non-ideal scenario, but if the commissioning team is engaged for functional performance testing only, would it be better that the test and balance is complete first?
Yes, but that is a non-ideal situation. I would still, even if it was at my suggestion, I would still suggest that, before we start test and balance, can we have a, pre-tab meeting and bring the commissioning provider in, because maybe there's some component, even though they're just doing functional performance tests, they're doing construction phase work, somebody stripped that commissioning scope down, and that's a short-sighted move in my part, but we do see people doing it. You may still get some benefit from, having that conversation with them, seeing, is there anything you're doing before you do your functional performance test, and that may be a rare scenario where, there is no room for collaboration because they say, no, until the systems are 100% complete, we're not going to go in, we're not going to do a functional performance test. So you guys complete all your test and balance work, and then we'll do that. You really don't have any opportunity to gain anything other than if you see issues, you can still provide that to them so that maybe they get those issues worked out before you get the call back to come and recheck things. But that is, certainly a non-ideal way of handling commissioning.
Okay. Next to last one, this is referring to a previous question about open tab issues. What do you think of the suggestion that the tab agency make sure that the commissioning provider lists tab issues, open tab issues, I assume, into the commissioning issue log so it's tracked at every meeting and not only hidden in the tab report?
I love that. I don't know what else.
Okay, that's a straightforward answer.
Because if you get your issues out in front of other people, and that's kind of what I've been talking about, is getting integrated into the commissioning process, and this is taking it down kind of into the nuts and bolts of getting those specific things out there. How many times have we sent out field reporter deficiency lists, or whatever we call them, as test and balance providers, and it's 50 things, and we'll tell them, okay, check these off, tell us when you're done, and we'll come back. And we get a voicemail or an email that says it's all done, come back. Well, no, can you look at the list and check off the things? No, it's done, trust me. Because we don't have a lot of times the leverage as the tab firm, unless we're working direct for the owner. But if we're working for the contractor, we don't have the leverage to force people to answer those item by item. And the commissioning provider usually does. So if they get integrated into the commissioning provider's list, and then the commissioning provider is helping to get resolution on those, that's great for us. Okay,
great. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase this last question so that it serves as a wrap up. Todd, if you had to summarize or list maybe the top handful of ways that the tab agency helps the commissioning authority with their tasks and getting their work done, what would those be?
I would say it would be the vast experience. We've seen a lot more systems than maybe they have, because we've balanced a lot of projects where commissioning wasn't involved. We know the specifics of how the systems work. We know the pitfalls of particular brands of devices. We know how those devices fail. We know what a typical mistake or shortcut that a control contractor might take. We know those things, and we can get that information to them ahead of time, and that will enable them to be on the lookout to this, either to prevent those problems or to solve them, and not leave them laying at the feet of the tab contractor when we're there to do our work. So that's that breadth of experience on different systems with different contractors is something that I think can be invaluable to a commissioning provider. Maybe the other thing is our ability to actually test, because the commissioning provider doesn't typically have the same instrumentation that we do, and they can't provide. They may have a gut feeling that something's not right, but we're going to be the ones that provide the measurements that prove it's not. And once it's, because when you can deny a problem, you can avoid a problem. And without data, a lot of people would prefer to deny the problem and hope it goes away. But once it's, once we can give that information to them, they have a much greater ability to work point and get that problem resolved.
Great, thank you so much. So that's going to close us out today. Todd, thank you so much for sharing, taking your time and sharing your expertise with everybody that joined us today. I do think this kind of presentation is particularly important. We want there to be more communication, more transfer of information back and forth between ACG commissioning providers and AABC test and balance providers. As Todd mentioned multiple times, there's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot that you two organizations on the member level can do to help one another and make projects go smoother, work better for the owner. So thank you all for being members, those of you who are on here today. Give us about a week to get your continuing education certificates out from headquarters for today's session. And be sure to join us. Hopefully most of you will also be joining us tomorrow for the session on variable refrigerant flow systems. So thanks very much again. Thank you, Todd, and thanks to all of you. Have a great day.